Hello, Claire.
Hi, Tommaso. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for joining me again. This is our Day 4 podcast concerning the Day 4 meditation, where we talk about growing up and choosing to be responsive rather than acting out in a reactive way. So I just have a few more questions about that meditation. My first one is, how do we learn to interrupt the story of I and make different choices?
Well, we have to understand what our emotional triggers are and how to deal with them. It's a very important step, really, in your emotional health. There are some situations that can trigger an intense emotion, for example, like betrayal, regret, insecurity, feeling unwanted, criticism, disappointment, feeling smothered, loss of self-control, being excluded or ignored, challenged beliefs, loss of independence, lots of things. So a big step in learning to recognise your triggers involves paying attention to them.
So when we are triggered and we lose it without being mindful, that happens to me a lot, how do we recover from this? How do we move on when we're caught in these situations?
Well, a big step is to recognise that you've been triggered, to pay attention in those situations, particularly those that involve a strong emotional response. So beyond the emotional triggers, you've also got physical sensations such as sweaty palms, upset stomach, pounding heart, shakiness, and dizziness. When that happens, you have to learn to stop and see what just happened and the response it triggered in you. And this takes practice. It's not something you do overnight.
So, for example, let's say you get an email with some news that you're not happy with. How does one react to?
Well, basically, if you become reactive at all, you know you've been triggered.
Yes.
And the only thing we can do is learn to follow those feelings back to their origins.
Right.
And when you do that, we may need to dig deep and see further connections in them.
What do we need to do to become more responsive rather than reactive then?
Well, basically, if we become reactive, you know that your inner dialogue has been triggered. So we need to follow those feelings back as far as we can to their origins. That will start to give us an insight into the way we're feeling. And we may need to dig deep and see the connections to those patterns.
So I remember you said in the meditation, Day 4, one thing that really struck me was when you said when we're stuck in the inner dialogue, we become reactive. We behave like a child. So every time I am reactive to something, I am aware now that I feel like, just as I was, as if I'm reacting as if I was a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to something that didn't please me.
But was really in the past. It wasn't really about now.
Right, so it's spilled over until now.
Yes, because we have an emotional charge in the body to those old feelings.
So when you do get this email that doesn't please you, or a phone call or a message, it is basically sparking off the old.
Yes, definitely.
In this meditation about growing up, it's not really growing up as in...
Well, I'm talking about learning to become mature. And maturity means taking responsibility. So, as we talked about in Day 4, that as we latch onto things, they cause us stress. Whereas letting go is stress relieving and helps us to access peace. So the more we latch onto something, the more it affects us mentally and physically. It causes tensions in the body.
So I remember another thing you were saying, so if you're angry, and I said, let go, you can't. It just takes... I like what you said about it takes at least half an hour for an intense feeling to move on.
Yeah, well, you can't, because the body is still going to be in that reaction. It's like if I was really angry and you said, Claire, let go. You can't just let go. You've got to let it run through the body. However, you can choose to place in your mind immediately that you don't want to stay there. But the body will still be in the old. As I say, that's what takes about half an hour to run through you. So learning how to stop what you do is putting these things into practice.
If someone's witnessing this, what's the best way to just step back and let them?
Well, I think the more you become aware of your own triggers, the more you start to see when other people are in their triggers.
Yes.
However, there are situations where we may need to say something, but the best course of action is to say something calmly and without criticism and not hooking into their dialogue.
Ah, that's the hard thing.
Well, that's why your own self-awareness is so important. Because the more self-aware you are, the more you're able to put that into practice in other areas.
I like how you also say about it, we can interrupt the story of I.
Well, we interrupt the story of I with awareness.
Okay.
With the practice of mindfulness. I also believe meditation is very important for this. Basically, by becoming mindful and learning to pay attention, it makes you more in tune with your feelings, and they can be helpful to understand your own triggers better.
Do you meditate in the morning?
Yes.
And how long do you usually?
I usually do about an hour and a half.
Fantastic. And you just let whatever come?
Yeah, I just sit.
Just sit through whatever?
Just sit.
The danger for me when I'm trying to just sit, sometimes I do get off wanting to react to something or wanting to do something. Because the mind is always there saying, well, do something.
So just try and come back to feeling the breath coming in and out of the nostrils gently. No force. Remember that relaxed state is really where there's no problem.
No, it's damn hard sometimes.
You know, sometimes we may need to leave a situation so we can calm down. And that's the best thing to do, is to leave the situation and calm down and breathe deeply until you feel you can be in that situation in a different way again.
Yes, that's a good point. That seems fine with me when I'm on my own, but when I'm with other people, that's a lot more difficult. When you're in a confrontation with someone, I guess that's the most difficult, because it's very hard to extricate yourself. Is that a word, extricate?
Yeah.
Yourself from that situation when you're in a face-to-face thing. What would you say to that? I mean...
Well, I think even then, you know, you could just say, give me 5 minutes or something to think about this and walk away, or go to the toilet or do something to distract yourself. So it helps you to calm down. You know, because basically, whether you like or dislike your feelings, we have to learn to accept them and don't deny them so you can work on them. And that's whether you're working on them with other people being there or not.
Yes. You know how in the past one could go to a cave and remove themselves and everything's grand, and then you get back into reality and bang. There's a famous story of this person who went to a Buddhist monastery and was meditating a lot, and then he thought, well, I made it, I've finally made it. And then the monk there goes, oh, yeah, you think so, right, okay. Well, can you please pay this bill for me and go down to the post office down in the town below? And that's where it all came unraveled, because the monk knew what a bitch it was to pay this bill at the post office down there, because it was like all mayhem and you had to wait in the line. So this guy waited in the line and it was the wrong line, and you got to the front of the line.
I think I told you that story.
Did you? Yeah. I love that story. What was this? Can you tell us?
Well, my story was slightly different. There's a man who meditated a lot in his cave and was, for many hours a day, was on his own. And one day his master said, can you go to the main city and live there for a while? and do your meditations there? And he said, sure, knew he was very centered and everything was fine. So he went to this big, huge, large city and found it unbearable. He couldn't cope. He got caught in all the shit. So, sitting on top of a mountaintop and being quiet and breathing all day is probably quite easy next to learning how to control yourself in the midst of shit.
Exactly.
So, you have to learn first to see what you do, then to stop what you do. And as I said many times, in any healing, when you take out, you must replace. But if you don't replace with something of a neutral intent, it will only create other conditions.
So, for example, what's a neutral intent?
Well, it's words that don't lock you into a certain thing.
As a condition, you mean?
Yeah, that has a condition attached to it.
What would be an example? Just for listeners who haven't heard us talk about this before.
I am a money magnet.
I've never heard that one. That's hilarious. I'm a money magnet. You can't say that very fast. Okay. Right, whereas...
Well, because the thing is, we are, in a sense, all of us are magnetic. We draw magnetic influence to us.
Yes.
But if we come in the centre and are neutral, it doesn't set up certain conditions. So you'd be better off to just say, money comes to be multiplied and multiplied and all my bills and expenses are met. It's not saying how much, it's not saying where from. It's just putting it out there.
Keeping it simple.
Simple.
Sending out a simple message.
It's got to be simple.
Right.
It was funny because I was listening to a very interesting program on cryogenics and ice freezing today on the way here. And they were talking about how they use it a lot for people with sportsmen and things like that to help healing the muscles. And they've done all these tests and found that people who use cryogenics or ice therapy heal much quicker than people who don't and have amazing results. However, this university has done very similar tests, and the test that they did it on wasn't using cold water or ice or cryogenics. It was using warm water. The difference was they were told they were using a magical oil in it that had healing benefits. So then what is that? Is that not just the mind? So I think there are physiological things that go on, but where you place your mind is vital. If you see a problem, you have one. By saying that, I'm not saying don't look at something that may not be useful. Look at it and see if there's a useful, quick...
Another thing you say a lot is devaluing a thought.
Well, by putting a new neutral thought in, you devalue the old. So our old inner dialogue or...
No, I understand where you're getting at, because devaluing a thought like, let's say, I'm ugly, no one loves me. They're quite powerful thoughts.
Incredibly powerful. So devaluing it by saying something of a neutral like I'm a beautiful, lovable, vibrant person, over time, because it's not going to happen immediately.
No, it's a life.
Over time, that thought can become the stronger intent, which means that you will then draw those things to you more.
I mean, like you said, it does take time. I mean, I think when I first met you, I would have been in my mid-20s. So I would have had over 2 decades of these thoughts.
Well, it's not just this lifetime either.
Yes, if you believe that also, then there's also the previous feelings.
Well, when we come through, we bring with us the emotional essence that we left with last time. And that is deeply, deeply embedded in the DNA. And then when we go into our mother's wombs, we take on all her feelings. So if mum felt unwanted or unloved, those two things help form an inner dialogue in us. And really our inner dialogue, or in psychology they call it schema, it runs your life.
Therefore, trying to devalue these thoughts just doesn't go overnight, because you have to just keep at it.
No, you've got to build them, and you have to think them, say them, believe them, become them. So in many, many ancient cultures, they've had very strong ideas about the mind and how it influences the way they see things. For example, even how some ancient cultures think rain and the rain will come.
All right, like the famous Indian rain dance.
Yeah, they may use all sorts of traditions and symbolic gestures and actions, but it's quite a powerful mindset, isn't it?
Another thing I love in that meditation you talked about, I'll just quote you: if we realized the power of making choices and decisions in our life were incredibly deep, and that we create our reality and take responsibility for our lives, it will always leave us feeling empowered, as spirituality and responsibility go hand in hand. It's very powerful.
It is very powerful.
What inspired you to write something profound like that?
Well, really, just to inspire people to work on themselves enough to understand that they do have power and ability to change things in their life.
Yes, often one can feel very powerless and go, well, there's nothing I can do. This is all, why me?
Well,
Why
that's
is this
right.
happening?
Whereas I think there's lots of things we can do. And I think it was the famous Persian poet Shams who said, I'll try and get it right now, I think, like we always see the upside as good, but how do we know the downside isn't the best?
And what the downside will lead you to.
Well, that's
next.
right.
Thank you, Claire. That's some very powerful messages there. As we're recording this, there's been major changes overseas. They have a new president. There seems to be this culture of giving that responsibility to someone to fix.
Well, I think we've done that for quite a while in our society now, is to take away the responsibility of things. I think joining together and having unity is very important, but it's very hard to have that if people aren't willing to negotiate, if they're not willing to come together and look at themselves.
That's right. It's very easy to be divisive, but a lot harder to.
Yeah, well, I think we have to have compassion and empathy.
Even if the other person's opinion does not match your own.
Completely. Totally.
You're always going to get there. There's someone that will not agree with you.
And that doesn't mean we can't love them or like them.
Yes, I've got some very close friends that have totally opposite opinion to me about things.
Yeah.
But you either decide, well, do I want to fight this, or B, just accept what is?
That's right. Just accept what is, and things will work out. I mean, what do you think changes people?
What?
Example.
Oh, yes.
So be the example, and that has more power than force.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Tommaso. I'll see you next time.
Next time.
On the bridge.
On the bridge.